Next up, we are looking at transforming brands, whether that's from PR exercises to forming valuable relationships with startups. Our panelists imparting their knowledge are Vivek Ramachandran of Hsbc, Mieke Schepper of Expedia, Richa Goswami of Johnson & Johnson, and Javier Meza of Coca-Cola. Please welcome to the stage their moderator, Louise Lucas of the Financial Times. Thank you very much.
This is your second one.
Hi, good afternoon. So we're talking today transforming brands, and we have on the panel bizarrely, three of the probably oldest brands that you could think of that are over 100 years old. We have Hsbc, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson. And Mieke, I'm keeping out of it for now because it's a new kid on the block with 20 years.
Yes.
So at Expedia. So what I thought is we'd start off talking about when you've got a brand that's been going that long, how the hell do you change it without alienating everybody? And Vivek, since you're beside me, let's kick off with Hsbc. I think you said 150 years?
Slightly over 150 years.
There you go.
I think it's important to be clear about why you're innovating to start with. And in our case, if you look at banking and financial services, the clients are demanding the innovation. Technology is letting clients deal with the banks differently. New business models emerging. So our mantra is to be client-led. And I think that's how you stay true to what the brand's been built on over all these years. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's important to be true to that.
Shall we move to J&J, Richa?
So I think it goes back to the why you do what you do, and I think it just links back to purpose, and that's been one of the, I guess, platforms that helps enable change. But most importantly, I think it goes back to who the consumer is, and they've changed. It goes back to competition, and that's changed. And you look at the capabilities that we need, that's changed. So I think a huge part of building about that transformation is helping people understand the burning platform, that if we do not innovate, we'll become irrelevant. And if you think about stats, like by, I think, 2020, 50% of Forbes 50 or 100 companies won't even exist. So we don't want to be that, right? So I think we need a change.
And I think it's important when you think the need to keep brands young despite being so old. What really matters is being clear about the essence of the brand. You know, what is fundamental to the brand and what is peripheral, and be willing to change what's peripheral as much times as needed, and be brave to keep what is essential to the brand forever. That's how we see that. And the second thing is, those essential things of the brand, you need to present to the consumers again and again and again in an updated fashion. Yeah.
How about some examples? I mean, let's take J&J, Richa. You know, we all still think of baby shampoo or whatever. What are some of the things that you've done? I mean, actual things. And the same with Coca-Cola. What are some of the things that have actually innovated, but without alienating the old guard? I mean, some things that we now see on the shelf that we might not have when, 10, 20 years ago.
Sure. So I'll talk about Clean and Clear. It's a product which I'm supremely passionate about. I've got 17-year-old twin daughters, and I think when I think of millennials and I think of teenagers, I think it's a great product that has a platform of see the real me and for loving you and accepting you for who you are. So we've gone from being the first company to do a transgender ad in 2008 in the United States to now doing chatbots. So we've done the global first chatbot where we did a tie-up with Spotify, Facebook, and Google, because what we found out was that teens today search a lot about acne and pimples. They're very passionate about music, so it was really about search behavior linked to selfie behavior. They're the most selfie generation. So you could take a selfie, you got a song that resonated with who you were, and that took you to the bot to then talk about things, and then we cross-sold you products, to then go into a store at Alphamart in Indonesia. And that was great, because I think with millennials, you're looking for things that connect with passion. You want things which are personalized, and pronto. right? So I think that's how we've been trying to stay ahead of the curve, bringing technology and innovation in to stay relevant, I guess.
Right. And Javier, on the opposite side of sports, you guys have brought out an alcoholic drink, right, in Japan, which is going absolutely incredibly well in Japan. It's totally viral. What was that decision, and is that about innovating and going around, or what's the news you've done?
About the clear Coke?
Yes.
I couldn't hear. The sound is not good here. What was your question?
The alcoholic Coke in
oh yes, in Japan.
Yeah.
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah. Yes, Japan is an interesting market for us. That's to be honest, that's an experiment yet. It's not a final decision made. What it shows for me is the willingness of the Coca-Cola company of taking risk and trying new territories to find growth opportunities. Of course, we don't believe that's going to be easy, but we need to try, and we will keep trying to offer to consumers what they want. And that's what we have been doing, not only with this experiment with alcohol, but if you think Coca-Cola brand, many years back, the secret formula was the ultimate marketing tool, and it's not anymore. Basically, what we are trying to sell through Coca-Cola is enjoyment and positivity, and you can find that in multiple fashions these days, as the Coca-Cola Classic, Coca-Cola with no sugar, with stevia, with coffee in Vietnam, with fibers in Japan. So as long as you are true to the promise, we play with the product. And that's a big shift, a big transformation that happened over the years with our brand.
Right, so Mieke, now as a baby, have you had to transform? I mean, 20 years, what's your journey?
Yeah, so as Expedia Group, we've been going through quite a bit of transformation. When you're 20 years old in the e-commerce space, you're kind of prehistoric. So we also had to transform, and we've done that quite a bit over the last couple of years. We have a whole portfolio of brands, and we've always looked at it. We've got Expedia, Hotels.com, Trivago, What If, and over the years, we've really built out a lot of brands because we believe that brands connect to people. That is all backed by one technology platform. And so more and more we look at ourselves as a platform where we connect travelers with suppliers of transportation and hotels. And so we've changed the way we look at ourselves. Before we were multiple brands, now we are a platform that reaches out to many travelers across the world on the leisure side, but also on the corporate side these days. So we are continuing to evolve on how we can utilize the technology platform we've built into connecting suppliers to users as efficiently as possible.
Right, and that whole platform concept is the basis of a lot of tech companies, and it's what we all associate with innovation and what's happening now. But in a sense, this is what fintech is turning into as well, even if you're not an app, but you are an old-fashioned, traditional bank, right? A lot more of it is about being a platform on which you can do more, albeit with bricks and mortar. Is that right, Vivek, or how would you see HSBC in the...
So probably the best marketing article you can read is by Theodore Levitt called Marketing Myopia. And it's 45, 50 years old, but it's still as valid today, where he says you need to figure out what's the essence of what you do. What is the business you're in? And I think banks, we're in the business of moving liquidity between different states of the world and different participants of the world. That's your perfect platform model. Right? The reality is we haven't necessarily built the platforms to connect everyone in the same format, and what technology lets you do is do exactly that. So 4 or 5 years ago, the dialogue between banks and fintechs would have been one of fintechs eating the bank's lunch. I think that's changed a lot. We realize we need to partner with fintechs, we need to use them. They've got solutions, but it doesn't make sense for us to build in-house. But at the end of the day, connecting buyers and sellers, connecting clients with opportunities is what we're trying to do. And that's the promise. So hopefully the new HSBC branding is out in the Singapore airports, and you'll see a refresh of the brand. So HSBC started as a trade bank, but now you see HSBC leading the way with blockchain. That's part of how technology is helping us use new solutions to solve old problems much better.
Right, and also the other thing that is happening now is that instead of, there's a lot of disintermediation going on, and you've mentioned it in banks. Interesting, Richa and Javier, with consumer products, that are you now finding that it's not just going and talking to Walmart, Carrefour, Tesco, whoever, but a lot more you're dealing directly with the end user, like you were talking about the pimply teens, Richa. How much has your model changed in that you are now going direct to the guys that are using or drinking your products? Javier, do you want to?
Well, and it's interesting because back to Japan, we in Japan own 1 million vending machines. So we are already talking to millions of consumers directly, offering products. capture information, using data and analytics to shape the offer. Now, we need to make that, scale that up. I don't see a world in the future where brick and mortar retailers are not going to be there. I think it's going to be an ecosystem. I think there's going to be of online to offline serving. But I can imagine a future in which consumers can design the products and the brands they want to consume. So I can imagine a future in which the consumer can take a mobile, design the Coca-Cola he wants or the Sprite he wants. If he wants more lemon taste, less lemon taste, more carbonation, click a button, or maybe use an assistant, a voice assistant, and order the product, and we will deliver that to their home the next day. Or maybe I can see a future in which consumers design the product they want, and as they go into the university, they scan the code, like the WeChat code, and the vending machine will pour the product they designed. That's the way I think the digital and the technology is going to allow us to transform the way we think our portfolio.
I think the disintermediation that's happening through digital and e-commerce platforms enables users to have a much more direct view on what's available. Well, before there were so many layers in between. There was information stuck in between, lots of money stuck in between with all those layers. And now that is being connected much more directly, which is providing an empowerment for users to make their own choices. But it is a bit awkward because those people we're supplying were not used to directly interact with those consumers. And that's in a consumer space, but also in a business space. And it's that delayering that is very uncomfortable for many people. It's the transparency, it's the dynamic part of information that is really changing how we work together, between different pieces of the value chain. And that's a very interesting dynamic, and for many people it's an adaptation on how we interact with each other, the information we share, and the business models that we've built out.
How do companies deal with that? Do you have to get new staff, or do people adapt? I mean, it's a massive change the way you're describing it.
It is, and I would say it's hard for companies to deal with that. I used to work in one of the traditional companies, Philips Electronics, as old as the other brands here seated. It's hard, and I saw that there. We talked about big data and using data, but now being at an e-commerce company, it's a whole different world. So I can tell you that, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and it really is true. And so it's hard, I think. It's really hard as a conventional company to really understand how an e-commerce company operates. So my advice to some of the people is kind of do a swap on talent, because I think there's a lot of value. I mean, an e-commerce company cannot create a Coca-Cola or the secret recipe, but we provide something else in terms of connectedness to consumers. And so how do we share the data that we have, how people search, browse, and look for things, to the manufacturers of the product to develop better products? And so how do you find a different way of working together? And for Expedia, we do that, for example, with our hotels. For a long time, there was a big debate about, and some of the brands had campaigns like Hilton Book Direct and Marriott Go Direct. And we sat around the table with them and say, how can we support your business? How can we support you with the information we have, with the consumers that travel on our website? We can help you to sign up for the loyalty programs that you have. We don't have to battle. We're here to provide you more travelers to come to your hotel. And we're not trying to take away your business because we don't have hotels. But again, it takes a bit of time and adaptation for companies not to see it as, to see change as a threat, but to find a way to embrace that change. And I see traditionally it's hard for companies that are organized in certain structures to embrace the change. And it really has to do, it's interesting, it happens so well in the consumer space. Everybody books online themselves. Why don't people do this in a corporate world? Because there are people in between that are making choices for other people. It is that layering in between.
Job creation.
A job creation for a part, and there is a big value for that for a long time. Perhaps there's a different job to be done. Yeah, I'm not saying that the job is no longer relevant, but it's a different job. I do see a lot of value, and I think a lot of companies are looking at how do you empower your employees to make those right choices, to adopt new technology. Because if you make it a headquarter decision, it's going to take way too long. So you need to find a way to enable your employees to take on that new innovation and to bring it into the company. But that's a very different model, because you don't wait for procurement to come and negotiate a deal.
Well, structure is one part of it, I think, which I completely agree with what you've said. I think education and awareness is another part of it. So the challenge with technology is it can be intimidating if you're not comfortable with what it means. So making sure, and especially at the top, so the reason why, if you look at the B2C world, is typically further along than the B2B world in terms of tech adoption. Because the end consumer tends to be a young millennial who's changing his or her behaviors, but the end consumer in a corporate setting may be a treasurer who's been around for 20 years, and that hasn't changed as much, but that's happening imminently. So I think education and awareness has to be a big part of changing the culture and driving adoption.
And how about, since we're all based in this part of the world, how much are we seeing things here that are actually either moving ahead quicker or it's easier to get adaptability? I mean, it's quite interesting in Southeast Asia because you're between two massive giants. You know, you've got all the Googles and the Facebooks in the West doing stuff. You've got Alibaba, Tencent, and the others in China, and a ton of startups, don't forget. Are you here able to look and pick the best of each, or are you finding it's actually easier to innovate from here, or is it harder because the shots are called back in London or wherever else, or Atlanta? How do you find that? Richa, do you have a view on that?
So I think if you think about Johnson & Johnson, so we come at it from different points of view, right? So we do have global partnerships with Facebook and Google and Alibaba and Tencent, right? So we've got all of them covered, and Snapchat. That helps us, so we work with them, we co-create with them, and I think you have no option at this point but to be in bed with them, firstly. Secondly, when I think of Southeast Asia, there are tremendous startups in this space. And frankly, I don't care where the innovation comes from as long as it's relevant for the consumer that I'm trying to connect with. So we've got in Johnson & Johnson a launchpad, which is where we reach out to startups all over the world, actually. We just did our first launchpad day. And in 10 days, we had 180 proposals, 110 startups from 35 countries around the world. So if your startup's interested, I'm doing a shameless plug here, to work with J&J, then just hit me up. But my point is there's a lot of them in Southeast Asia, and they do amazing stuff from content creation, personalization, advocacy, new retail. So I think you've just got to find the startup that connects with the brand experience you're trying to create. So we do it with, everyone, actually, to be honest.
We follow the data, and we are meticulous about having data to understand what's happening, how people are experiencing our sites in all the different places in the world. So I think innovation can happen. For us, it's very data-driven. It's also very incrementally driven. We try to get a little bit better every day. But we complement the data with local insights. So here in Singapore, we've got a local innovation lab where we put real consumers in front of our sites and see how it works or get to use the app. So I think it's a combination for us in terms of innovation. It can happen anywhere. It is more challenging in places like in China because, again, knowing the specifics of a Chinese consumer, that is quite different. But utilizing data helps you a lot these days.
And I think, back to your question of how easy it is, I think it's quite easy in Southeast Asia. I think in Singapore, I mean, the hub of startup is amazing. One piece of advice I would give humbly to those startups is they need to start thinking regionally from day one. Because, I have had meetings with a couple of startups here doing a very nice work on sentiment recognition, social listening, for example. Nice work. And the next question I make is, okay, how do we put this in China, Tokyo, Delhi, Hindi, Mandarin, Japanese? Oh, we don't have that solution yet. You need to think regionally. Even if you are starting Southeast Asia, if we want, and I know that Singapore deserves to have the relevance it has in the regional context, startups need to start thinking and using partners like us to have regional relevance.
I mean, the advantage you've got in a market like Singapore is a very forward-looking regulator. And in a sector like financial services, that's hugely important. So HKMA is encouraging technology innovation too. So are regulators outside, but someone like the MAS embraces technology in what they do. And I think that's been hugely beneficial for innovation in this part of the world.
Right, that's a fair point. I was quite interested, Richa, in your point on your launch pad. What are you others doing about startups? Because of course that's where a lot of the, especially we can see here today, a lot of the innovation is coming from. Vivek, what does HSBC do?
So the number of startups, if I had $1 for every time I was approached by a startup saying I can solve your problem, I would be retired by now. Right? So the challenge is big organizations face complex problems. And so what we try doing with startups is giving them the exam question and getting them to work on it. So if you take financial crime, for example, we're working with a lot of small companies, not because they have an answer off the shelf, but because they may have a skill set or a different way of solving a problem. I mean, Simon Singh in the code book talks about how the first encryption software came about in an interview where the candidate was sat down, the interviewer said, I'm solving this problem, why don't you have a look at it while I step outside? And the candidate actually thought he's being asked, it's a part of the interview, and solved it in 10 minutes. So being naive about the history, being naive about the complexity of the problem lets you solve things differently. So my advice to the startups is work with us, come talk to us, but it's unlikely it's going to be an off-the-shelf solution to the problems we face. So you have to be willing to invest the time with a big company to understand what the problem is, and then apply the skills that make you exciting to us to solve that.
Javier, what does...
Basically, we work in two operating models. One is we have a program that was created in Israel many years back, and it was launched in Singapore this year. It's called The Bridge, which is basically working with the startup hubs to identify startups that have technical solutions, technological solutions that help our business. And we do partnership with them, help them refine the tools. Sometimes we help them transfer the knowledge and technology from other fields into our field, and from there scale up. That's the intent. And we have also an VEB arm. We don't speak too much about that, of course. That's more strategic, but we also do investments behind venture capitalism.
The other thing that all of you, I think, have touched on, especially Mieke, is data, which we're all told it's the new fuel, it's new electricity, whichever. How much is that being totally exploited? I liked your example of the vending machines, although, again, unless it's cigarettes, I don't think you put in much detail about yourself, but...
Yeah, and here's my dream. We have every day, globally, around 2 billion transactions. 2 billion? 2 billion transactions. So imagine the day I can capture data of those 2 billion transactions. It's a different play. And I think even that a lot of big partners that I saw today, I'm not going to name them, but I saw a lot of big partners are going to be interested in doing things with us if we can collect 2 billion transactions a day of data. Now, how far are we from that? We're still far away from that. But that's the future. The future one day will arrive. If there's one reality about the future, is one day will arrive, and you better be prepared for that. And yes, on the vendings, we are in the process of setting up our data acquisition and data analytics strategy. It's not that clear. When it comes to companies like us, the use case is not that clear. You need to do a lot of testing, validation, before saying, okay, this is it. And that's the stage where we are today.
For us, that's our day-to-day work. The test and learn approach of every day running different tests. One person, you could see a different site than you, and trying to tweak and having small incremental tests going on. So we have more than 7,500 tests a year. We use data of, we're not at 2 billion, we're at 750 million searchers per day on our site, but we combine that with more 200 sites that we have. And the interesting part, for example, on the corporate travel that I'm part of at Agencia, is we utilize the search information that we have on our leisure site to help to optimize the travel experience that we provide travelers when they're on the corporate, when they do a corporate trip. And it's interesting, well, we talk often in marketing about segmentation. I also, it's really hard these days because I'm a person, when I travel with my family and with my kids, I like to stay at a place where there's a fridge and there's a sofa and me and my husband can have a glass of wine after the kids are to bed. But when I travel for work, everything needs to be organized. I'm often only 2 days in the place. So I am still the same person. So when we talk about using data for personalization, I think it's great if a brand can utilize the information that I provide to them as I search personally, but how do we make that relevant as well in another setting? And so real personalization is about understanding not only who the person is, but the experience that the person is looking for. And being able to use data for that and connecting the dots across different platforms in different moments, that is really where I would say the new world is going. And when we talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, all the kind of the acronyms, this is where it's going to, and I don't think we're there yet. I think we have a lot more work to do, but I think that's where the value of data is in really providing better experiences. Data by itself is pretty irrelevant.
So it's almost not so much big data, but it's the two Miekes. It's the businesswoman Mieke and the mother Mieke, right?
Yeah.
And you need to differentiate for each one. Yeah. How about with Hsbc, Vivek?
I think there's a lot more we can do with the data in the...
Because you must have loads.
Yeah, we have tons of data. So I think...
Challenge him over there.
Individual customer... I'm not going to throw out a data point bigger than 2 billion a day, but I think bigger than... So individual optimization, we're doing quite well with data. So whether you get a personalized loan or you get a personalized credit card, we're doing quite well. There's data in the ecosystem which can make the markets more efficient. That's, I think, the next big challenge. So where you have lack of credit, but there's somewhere data in the ecosystem which should make credit available. Or where you have paper transactions where digitizing that will capture more data. I think that's the next big leap.
Just give an example, put that into real life. Do you mean I don't have a job, but I've got a house that's worth 3 million?
Or for an example, you're a small supplier who supplies a larger supplier who supplies Coke.
Right.
Now, if you bank with a local bank in a market who doesn't have a relationship with Coke, the fact that you are part of Coke's value chain is typically not taken into account. Or it's difficult for that institution to take that into account. But there is data in the ecosystem which should make that available. So the Asian Development Bank estimates is 1.6 trillion of trade finance needs that are not met. And some of that you can meet much more efficiently with data. So I think that's the next big leap in terms of using data, which is macro, making the markets more efficient. And I don't think we've got there yet. The flip side of data, I think it's also easy to misuse data. So we've stayed away from the negative sides of what you can do with data, but I think it's really important you treat data with a lot of respect, because our clients expect us to deal with their data and adhere to certain standards. So it's important that you keep that in mind too.
Well, I think it's especially important with banking, but we've obviously seen with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, it goes much, much broader. Obviously, just last month we had Europe bringing in GDPR. What's happening here, and how do you play it? Again, especially being sat here, where on the one hand, you've got that very tight and a lot of head office in Europe or operations in Europe, but on the other hand, you've got China there, where it's a little bit more of a free-for-all. How do you handle that?
You hold yourself to the highest standard across all the markets you're in, and you have that as your global standard. Yeah. Which means in certain markets you may be disadvantaged against a local player who doesn't adhere to that standard, but that becomes your, and I think as a global institution, that does need to be the approach.
Is that your approach?
No, that's absolutely our approach as well. So GDPR has become almost a synonym of just talking about data security overall. But again, it's one standard set. It's in principle for European consumers. But we hold up ourselves to it across the world. We have many customers that operate across the world, so we have to. I agree with you that compared to sometimes local competition, we get a little bit, in that sense, disadvantaged. But I think that's a temporary inefficiency, and over time, those things will be resolved.
But does it make it harder if you don't know somebody's age, sort of sexuality and various other things? They might want to go on a different holiday than, Ibiza rather than the Cotswolds, for example. I don't know. Does it start to undercut a little bit the business model?
No, I think especially when related to GDPR, it's also a lot of the information related to payments, which of course the most sensitive data that's there. GDPR doesn't limit us from having data, it's just being able to provide it back to consumers when they're asking for that data. We spend a lot of time in making sure that our systems are secure in terms of breaches and data security, and those of our partners. And again, data is like money these days. It's an important thing to keep very safe, as again, the wrong people can do very wrong things with it. And so we hold ourselves up to the highest standard, but I would say in this world with technology, that's hard work to make sure that your data is safe. Because there's many people around. I think data theft is probably becoming more popular than any other theft.
Right. But I mean, still, people can obviously choose not to give you the data, which then does
Yeah,
Great.
we can learn a lot from other data points. So data is very broad. Is it about age or gender? But we get data from how people look at a hotel. And so when we do our test, we can see the facial expressions of a person if they like or dislike it.
This is in your
This is in the lab.
The lab,
take
yes.
that. But from that we learn how people browse, and we can recognize certain patterns when people go browsing. And so we learn for every search, every movement that people make, we learn about that person, that consumer. Now you can choose to log in or not. So we know who you are, and that's a personal choice. But we will try to do our best to provide the best options and solutions for travel as possible. And again, people are looking for those suggestions because there's so much options these days in retail. And one of the advantages of having e-commerce, suddenly the whole world is open, but the whole world is a lot of information.
Yeah.
So if you try to go and search, you can spend endless time on e-commerce sites finding the product. So there is a need for, while we wanted more, now there's a need to simplify it and bring it back and to curate. But the curation has to be honest, it has to be transparent, and as soon as people feel there's somewhere a push of trying to make somebody move into a certain direction, if they cannot trust the curation, it becomes very tricky. So it needs to be, making that very objective is very important.
Right. Richa, GDPR and data privacy, how has that been for J&J?
So, I mean, I agree with both of them, actually, and I think you have to hold yourself to the highest standard when you think about data, but there's a fine line between personalization and being creepy. So I think, for us, the really important thing, as a big FMCG, is really focusing on first-party data, because as much as we have D2C brands, as much as we have Amazon and Lazada and everyone giving us a bit of data, it's how do you really use first party to even have that competitive edge, because they'll only give me what they choose to give me, but I've got to get to know my consumers better. So we've been focusing a lot on how do you pull that and get better with search data, browsability data, and I think we've got to show value to the consumer to share data with you, but above all, we have to be compliant. So I think, it is a fine balance, but what we've been focused on is simple questions, right? Like, who is she, where is she, what she wants, start with that, start pulling the data, and then just do audience segmentation, lookalike audiences, test different pieces of creative, do it differently, see what's working, start building out the segmentation, and then push money behind that. So I think we realized we can't win in the old world, so because data is the new currency, right? And the reason it matters is because it creates personalized experiences. So I think to win and to transform your brands, you've got to be there, but you've got to be that in a manner which is, I think, purposeful and thoughtful and not creepy. So,
how about Coca-Cola? Can you make it a compelling enough reason, as Richa says, to encourage people to give you the currency of data that you require? Or?
And I think, we all know it all starts by defining what problem in people's life are you trying to solve. It all starts there. And honestly, you don't need necessarily big data to capture value of the data. Sometimes with 6, 7 well-thought data, type of data, you can already do good business decisions and drive incremental revenue. And I want to give you another hypothetical example, something that is somewhere in the future. Think about the experience of purchasing tickets online, airline tickets, right? And the way airlines can do dynamic pricing. Even sometimes I believe that if you spend more than 10 minutes in the site, they will increase the price because they believe he's gonna purchase the ticket, right? So
it's a question I get very often if we do that. We don't.
We can speak without the mic.
We don't.
So imagine a vending machine that I can do dynamic pricing. Maybe I don't need all big data. All I need is some basic data and digital solutions and do dynamic pricing. And maybe I can push products depending on the hour of the day. Or
how hot it is.
No, maybe how cold it is. We sell coffee in Japan, hot coffee. So there's a lot of value that still can be captured with a sound data strategy without dreaming into going all the way to big data and infringing a lot of the...
But as a consumer, it's quite nice to know how much a Coke costs without peak pricing. So I'd keep dynamic pricing out.
We're running pretty short of time. Do you want to sum up in sort of half a dozen or 10 to push words what is really important on transforming brands that people might think about? Vivek, do you want to kick off?
I mean, I'd go back to what I started with, which is you've got to stay true to what you started as a company, and which is, in our case, being client-centric and help succeeding through our customers. And if you do that, it'll give you a framework within which to innovate and to prioritize most decisions.
Okay, Vivek's cheated incredibly on the number of words, but
6 words up.
Mieke, what
As I
would
would
be your
say,
takeaway?
+1. That's how we say. I agree. But I would add to that is really empowering your employees and the people in your organization to do that. So putting back the power in the hands of people who interact with your customers and consumers every day.
So that's Miike's +2. Any advance, Richa?
I think when I think of it, I think that people buy the stories you tell, not the products you sell. And you know, when you come from a company that's been it's FMCG, it's iconic brands. It's all about the products, right? So how do you move from promise to purpose? How do you move from one size fits all to one size fits one? So I think as we look to, at least for us, transform our brands and create connected experiences, it's going back to the consumer, what she really wants, and just trying to be relevant to her.
Javier?
And maybe I'm going to separate between transforming the enterprise, transforming our company versus transforming the brand. When it comes to the company, I think we need to be brave and anticipate the future. As I said, one reality of the future is it will arrive, and you better be prepared. And as you asked the question, how do you do that when you have a business up and running? You need to create the spaces for new partnerships, new models, for failure, try new things. When it comes to the brand, as I mentioned before, make sure you understand the essence of your brand, and please don't change that. And everything else, keep changing and keep updating and presenting and representing to consumers.
So keep the old as well as seeing the new in. Everyone, thank you very much for your time, and thank you as well to the audience for being such a great audience. Thank you.